mankind's pushing out, settling different planets around different solar systems, and this is all being pushed by business. So the conceit I have for my story is that business is running the government, and so in terms of how do you solve the overpopulation problem of the Earth, get rid of people. So how do you get rid of people? Start making planets, and since that's a slow process, just find a bunch of good candidates for planets, launch some, exploration, and then terraforming projects, which includes creating space cities. Once the space city is up and running, which could be 20 or so thousand people. I'm not sure exactly how many, but like within tens of thousands of people. The space city is running. We have this big space station floating around with a small crew aboard. You can fit another 250,000 people on there. So essentially that's what the Terran government starts doing. It's saying like, okay, space city's up and running, you're terraforming, excellent, here's a bunch of colonists that you get to take care of. And those colonists are brought in, but this is upsetting to the people who live there because the different mentality, since the science perspective is this is a long-term project to terraform this planet. It's going to take a lifetime. It's not going to be myself. It'll be my children or their children who will be able to settle on this planet. So we are part of this community. We're working towards this goal. We are all orientated towards this goal. And to have 250,000 colonists now plopped on your space city is a little upsetting. It's a little jarring because this small community, because it would be the size of a small city or a large town that is growing and developing to create this planet that they can settle on in the future. It's their expectation that our community labor will create this planet. So all these extra people are there, but what are those extra people doing? How are they contributing to the terraforming? There's only so many bodies you can put on a project, so to speak. You can only hurry it along so fast. So as a result, you're taking care of a lot of extra mouths to feed. That puts a strain on the resources of the space city, but it's manageable. It can be done because of the size of the thing. Size doesn't really matter, and you have all the resources of a whole solar system at hand. So, with that in mind, the massive expansion efforts going on by the Terran government, seedling all these different planets around the universe, the galaxy, and eventually they get to the point of the different corporations and businesses. They're trying to steal from each other ideas, technology, what is the latest research that's being done. So space piracy begins. And since this is a very new, different concept, people are not fully aware, like, wait a minute, we're missing some material, like, what happened here? And as time goes on, countermeasures are instigated, and they get to the point like, well, now the space pirates, they're bold, they're up front, like, all right, here comes in a mysterious craft, no signals, takes some material or a cargo container of some sort and whisk away with it. Or hides it in some way, or who knows. But it's space piracy becomes a problem. And the storyline I create is that eventually they do capture some space pirates, but they're given light to, like, what sort of sentences are these? And it's fairly quickly understood and realized, like, okay, it's these businesses who are hiring these guys to be pirates for them, and since the businesses are also running the government, they're basically sham trials or hiding the evidence, or like, oh yeah, guilty verdict and pays a fine and maybe a little bit of time served, whatever, but that's it. Just keep the story quiet. Don't want too much information or investigation going on. The people in the space cities, they're not happy with this, and as a result, they begin to have a separatist mentality, and so that's where eventually space combat, or war machines for space, it starts to be created. Okay, so now the good stuff. Now the fun part. So what happens in space combat? I think that an ultimate end-all weapon is a EMP pulse, electromagnetic pulse, to just just destroy, nullify any electronic equipment. And I'm not certain how it would interact with a space city, since it is creating its own Van Allen belts with its spinning, iron dynamo effect. But the space city is large enough that if part of it was hit by an EMP of whatever size, there's other parts of the city that can maintain themselves. So the safety of the space city is sort of maintained, and it's understood that conceivably anyone from a distance can just pelt the space city, destroy it from a distance, but who wants to be a mass murderer? So that's not the goal. People don't want to kill each other, and if the space city feels threatened, then they will launch an EMP and kill, or basically negate any spacecraft that are around them that are hostile towards them, which is essentially a death sentence, because if you launch an EMP, it detonates, all these spacecraft are dead in the water. Now, can you send search and rescue craft out there fast enough to grab the people who now, how are they breathing? How are they recycling their oxygen? What's happening to their the reactors of their spacecraft? So it's like, what's what would happen? So the battles would take place at a distance away from the space cities, and in such a way that the trajectory of weaponry would not hit the space city itself. And so I went through thinking, okay, what would the spacecraft look like? And I started with single-seat fighters, two-seat fighters, three-seat fighters, because, and I had the hardest time just figuring out, like, what would the vehicle look like? Because I kept thinking like a teardrop, in a way, so that tapered in, and that way it just kind of whips through space in whatever different way and direction, and essentially would be a tube shape. And part of the idea of the tube is that you can seal off either end and fire a projectile. So an explosion-based projectile, like an artillery gun or a rifle, round of some sort, and fire it out of through the tube. And since it goes both ways, you can seal either end. You can shoot it front or back. A couple missiles outlined around the side of it, and because of the issue of micrometeorites, they would develop the technology of laser beam defense. Something or other, like a rod or a tentacle, almost, you could say. So conceivably, coming out of 4 points from the spacecraft, you would have what would look like a articulating arm, and on the end of that arm would be a little rod that a laser is able to shoot out of, and so that way it's able to, if the craft can recognize projectile coming in, and aim at it and fire, and whatever's close by because of the laser and loss of energy because of traveling through space. So light laser in a small single craft can only go so far. It can only do so much damage, like very little damage. It's the projectiles or the missiles that the fighter's carrying that's able to do damage. The pilot within the craft, I'm thinking, has no interface really. A simple craft would, a pilot is completely encased in what would look like an egg-shaped chamber in the center of the craft, strapped into their back because the weight's not an issue, and so their arms are able to move around freely, and what's on their hands, their gloves, would be a control mechanism. So it'd be similar to video game control, and that they're able to, how they're able to manipulate their hands, their fingers, controls the movement and the firing of the craft. So, yeah, I'm thinking that as you're watching the guy fight, from his perspective, he's moving one arm, one hand to indicate, like, okay, speed up, slow down, turn, let's do a banking roll, let's flip. And then the other hand is manipulating his viewpoint of his craft, what's going on around him, as well as orientating the targeting system. So, the guy could do whatever banking roll or a curve of some sort, and with momentum, able to turn, aim the central firing mechanism, and unload some artillery rounds, or fire a missile or two. And yeah, just avoid from enemy aircraft along those lines. I was even thinking that they can get to the point of having cranial implants. So, little thing in the back of your head, it sends wires out, connects to different parts of the brain, and as a result, the pilot develops an ability to have an extra control sense over the craft. So they're able to control the flight or firing, or who knows, easier, better. So you go up the in terms of firepower. So single fighter, two-seater fighter, three-seater fighter, get to the point of gunboats, which I would assume would be like take a railgun or four, loaded with a couple artillery pieces, some missiles, laser, defenses around it, and it's robot controlled, or it's a remote controlled. So you go into battle, somebody has a direct line of communication with that thing and is able to tell it where to go, what to do, and it can take damage, take a beating. And missiles would be the missiles you see today. Torpedoes would be a larger missile that has its own shielding device, or shielding generator on board. So it's able to shield itself, has more warhead, explosive impact charge on it. So it's able to, if you get close enough, launch the torpedo, and that thing will strike a capital ship and do a lot more damage. So yeah, capital ships. The smallest, I'm leaning towards, so a destroyer would be a manned gunboat that would have conceivably 4 or more railguns on it, and small crew. Then the next higher up from that would be a frigate, and a frigate would have a carrier bay. So part of the idea of a capital ship, so a craft large enough that it's going to hold several people, it has a reactor on board for power, it's able to generate shields for itself, it's able to, you have people on board who can repair as you get damaged, people who are in charge of different targeting systems, medical personnel, and I'm assuming the command bridge would be like the centermost point of the craft. The people would be arranged in a circle facing each other, and possibly standing, but they have a screen in front of them. They would have a projector that puts a 3D image in front of them, or at least that they have a screen that they can look upon that gives them the image that they're supposed to be seeing, from whatever perspective. But I assume that like a 3D projector just gives a better perception of like what's going on in space around the craft, and so that way they get the 3D like outside perspective of what's happening, who's shooting at the craft, and what do we need to do. And you have some, different person in charge of different areas of the craft. So when you get to a frigate, you add one extra person who is the flight control officer. So that's the person that controls the fighters. When you get to the size of a frigate, which I would say holds like 1 2-seater and 2 single-seater fighter craft, you also include, and the best way I can think of it is, think of what looks like a tank or a Volkswagen Beetle skittering around the skin of the capital ship, and coming out the top of it is like a tentacle of some sort. The idea of the tentacle is that it goes beyond the shielding of the capital ship, and at the end of that tentacle is a turret. So railgun as well as a tube for shooting artillery or missiles, and it's that tentacle which is able to supply the energy as well as the ammunition to that turret. So this little guy is moving around, avoiding being hit, possibly even being on. So now I get into more different concepts, but anyways, this guy is moving around the surface of the capital ship, avoiding being hit, meanwhile firing off at the enemy. And if it takes damage or needs resupply, goes into the hangar bay of the capital ship. I'm even thinking that the surface of the capital ship, since it's armored, it's designed to just be layered in meters thick of iron, rock, water, honeycomb chambers full of water and whatnot. Just anything and everything that can take damage. And the beauty of the water is that an explosion hits the water, it's going to absorb a lot of that energy, turn to steam, and then immediately freeze into ice and stay in place, on the capital ship. So in a sense, it becomes this, like whatever iron scrap and stuff, and it soaks in, and just it's a lot harder to dismantle this armor on the capital ship. So a frigate has a small carrier bay. Next up, I am thinking would be a cruiser. Now the cruiser would be torpedo shaped, and what I'm thinking is that almost peanut shaped in some ways, because no, it'd be torpedo shaped. Sorry, the reactor would be in the center. The whole ship itself is going to looks like a blank mass except for 2 doorways. What is the weakest point on the ship? The 2 hatches for the fighter craft to get out, those can be covered in like petals or shells, so they're able to, take away or when they're not facing the enemy, you can repair the scales, as I'm calling them, of the hull of the ship. In the center, you have the reactor. The reactor needs a route for the reactor core to be ejected. So in case it goes critical and it's going to explode, you can eject that core. So that's the third weak point of the frigate, or of any capital ship, or the main weak point. That can be armored as heck, but still, if you expose that to the enemy, where's the enemy going to fire at? They're going to fire at the weak point, at that hatch. Try to break down the armor and weaken it to the point where, you would have to eject the core because it's blowing up. You don't want to blow up the ship inside of you, or blow up inside of your ship. So how do you get around that? What I call the combat roll. So 2 ships, they see each other, and when they get within sort of line of sight, or at least a close enough distance, they would change their orientations and then begin rolling. And the roll would be fast enough that for the carrier or the cruiser, it generates a microgravity. So it's pushing everyone against the outside walls. And that is good for the personnel on the craft because it gives them a bit more purchase, a little bit easier to move around, maneuver. And so the command staff, if they're sitting in a circle in a room, they're slowly being pushed to the outside wall. Anyways, the combat roll, the craft is moving, rotating. The tanks or turrets of the capital ship is moving around, and what he's then going to do